Hi, I'm Vadd, and I have to ask the question, how does a series about a guy in his underwear and a talking cat somehow turn into one of the biggest, weirdest science fiction stories I've read in years? Because if you're not familiar with it by now, it's basically the premise of Dungeon Crawler Carl. If you've read it, I'm really curious, when did you realize this series was becoming something much bigger than the original premise? Because today I'm going through the series so far, talking about what actually happens across the books, a short summary here, and where I think the larger story is heading, and just giving my general thoughts on the whole thing. Which means, of course, yes, full spoilers from here on out. This is full of spoilers. There are spoilers everywhere. I think the easiest way to understand Dungeon Crawler Carl is just guy and talking cat survive alien death game. Like, that's kind of the premise right at the start of book one, just in those early chapters. It's just a guy, his talking cat, and an alien death game they're trying to survive. But as I journeyed further and further through the books, all of a sudden the story starts to reveal itself into this galactic revolution. There's an ancient artificial intelligence, an economy essentially built on genocide, and we have Carl just systematically figuring out how to break the machine. At the time of recording, books 1 through 8 are published, they are completed, they are out to be enjoyed, and it's my understanding the author has said, hey, I have one narrative arc to kind of finish things up. It'll be spread across 2 books. So we're still waiting for kind of the big conclusion that's going to be tied up together in books 9 and 10, as of the last thing I heard. Book 1 is Dungeon Crawler Carl, right? Earth gets repossessed. The aliens show up and they're like, hey, if you want to survive the next kind of changing of seasons here on this planet, wink, you can enter an enormous 18-floor dungeon, and it's very video game coded, right? It's in the genre of literary RPG, which takes all kinds of, video game elements and puts them into a book. And if you're going through the dungeon, you're a crawler, right? And the whole thing's broadcasted to every alien that watches it like a big reality TV show. It's such a weird premise. And it only gets stranger because our main character enters in basically his underwear, and then his cat, Donut, shows up, right? Suddenly his cat eats a magic biscuit and gains close to human levels of intelligence and speech. And man, it's just such a weird premise. It's so hard to even just simply describe that series of events, right? Earth gets repossessed, aliens send humans in, or give humans an option to enter a dungeon. They become dungeon crawlers. You've got a character in his underwear. Next thing you know, his cat talks and he's fighting for survival. It's just such a wacky, absurd premise. And it keeps the same level of absurdity the entire way through. On some level, I feel like as a genre, lit RPG has a book 1 problem. They just have to work too hard to explain things. But I think Dungeon Crawler Carl does a good job of having things that are kind of obvious, that as a reader, you could show up and have some idea that, okay, you kill monsters, you level up, you get loot, there's quests you complete. There's just things that like you understand kind of coming into the book, or at least I did. And then there's kind of the entertainment factor, right? People understand what reality TV shows are before Dungeon Crawler Carl. I think the thing that kind of threw me off early on, and I think it threw off Carl too, which is maybe as a reader why it caught me a little flat-footed as well. So he's that main character, is that survival alone isn't enough. You can't just grind quests, get loot, and level up. The popular crawlers, they get interviews and sponsors, and those sponsors give better equipment. And the dungeon is intentionally manufacturing tragedy and conflict because that suffering is making a better reality show for the wider galaxy. I think the best part about kind of the end of the first book is that we have 2 characters, Carl and Donut the cat, and they go from victims to celebrities. Carl begins to realize that the dungeon's rules can be exploited, and we kind of get an understanding of where this series is going to go. I remember finishing this book and my only thought was, that was weird, but I kind of liked it. That's all my notes. I was like, this is weird. Let's try the second one. I was still a little unsure about where I felt the series was going to end, as it just kind of opened a bunch of doors and said, hey, here's this wacky, weird world with kind of unusual characters that are kind of fun, doing wacky and weird things, but it's also kind of horrible at the same time. Do you like it? Do you want to see more? I'm kind of curious where they ended up. Book 2 is titled Carl's Doomsday Scenario. And in this one, we start meeting some more characters that are going to stay along for the ride. And our characters have successfully gone through, I said earlier, there are, I think, 18 floors to the dungeon. They're in floor 3 kind of here in book 2. And so I early on just started doing math. If they're doing 2 floors a book, it's going to be a 9-book series, blah, blah, blah. We'll get back to that later. But in book 2, Carl and Donut get to pick a permanent race/class. And I thought this was so fun that they could switch, right? Where Donut didn't have to be a cat, Carl didn't have to be a human. This opened up a lot of fun for me, where I was thinking, if I was Carl, what would I be picking right now for my skills, for my class, for the changes coming up? And we end up with, I think Donut got like former child actor, and Carl got, I think it was Primal Anarchist or something crazy. It all kind of fit into the skills they've been doing so far. So it wasn't like too wacky, but it definitely added kind of a weird twist where As our characters have gotten more established in the dungeon and understanding the wider universe they're now a part of, they also are starting to become aware that the NPCs they're interacting with and maybe slaughtering might actually not just be computer generated. They're not just non-playable characters. And they're starting to ask this broader kind of, maybe not a morality question, but are we actually killing real people? Do they actually die? Because some characters, seem to die and then, they're not quite dead, right? And I think the thing that really stood out to me in this book, the second one, was that Carl stopped thinking about winning the quests. How do I get from point A to point B with the most loot, most XP? How do I get the interviews to get the sponsors? And he really starts thinking about how to break things in a major way. Where before he broke some things just by nature of who he was and what he was doing, but now he's kind of actively working towards it. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Carl's Doomsday scenario is when he gets an item that he can't really remove from his inventory that's going to explode or something. I think it was literally called the Doomsday scenario item. It's kind of like a bunch of like weird narrative choices here to give your character essentially a big bomb and say, hey, you have to hold on to it. Like, okay, when does it go off? Because it doesn't happen in this book. There's just a lot of things here in the second book that you don't really realize the significance of until much later on into the series that you just can't appreciate because you don't know what is foreshadowing or setting up. And there's just a lot of things that happen in this second book that I'm actually tempted to reread just to kind of be fresh in my mind coming into the final, finale in books 9 and 10 here. But this is a book where I was kind of like, and I do think I want these characters to win. Through book 1, I was kind of like, this is kind of fun, but I don't know if I like anyone here. In book 2, I was like, well, can they win the dungeon? Like, they're doing pretty well. And so, my big notes here were like, okay, I kind of like these people, but where's this story actually going? Because it's not gotten any less wacky. Book 3 I struggled with. I think it's the Dungeons Anarchist Cookbook. It's this big train level with train stations and portals and this messy transportation network. I kind of struggled to keep up with where the trains were going and how much they mattered. But this is the book that Carl really decides, can he not just like break the dungeon they're in, but the entire galactic system that has created this horrible position they're in, right? Earth got repossessed. The aliens showed up and said, hey, we own it. And if you're not dead, if you're still alive, we're going to mine this planet dry. You can go into this dungeon for our little reality death game show. Like, oh, okay. Like Carl's kind of decided that he should break the universe, right? He's pretty much decided the system that everything kind of runs on is just not the way it should be. He gets this, I think it's called a cookbook, but he gets this cookbook and there's apparently other people who have tried to do this, and he starts taking notes and leaving notes in this book for his plans. For me, this was the first book where the main characters were no longer just kind of crazy people, but they're more than survivors. We're like books 1, they're just trying to survive, trying not to die is like their biggest thing in book 1. And book 2, they're kind of figuring out like how to be successful. But in book 3, they're no longer just survivors. They're actually doing things that are affecting things far beyond them in a major way. They don't know it yet. And there's some other interpersonal stuff here, but it's not super interesting. I think the most interesting thing for me here was the fact that there is this tangible item, this cookbook that the crawlers who've been in this horrible position of this alien death game have been passing along to each other. Like, I really like that idea. But again, as a reader, I kind of struggled because it opened another narrative loop that isn't closed. Because here at book 8, we know a lot more about the things that have been set up, but they're not finished yet. So this was another book that very subtly started more narrative loops here. Book 4 gets us to the Gate of the Feral Gods, and it has Carl and Donut on the 5th floor. And I actually really liked this floor's design. It was these big bubbles. And inside the bubbles were these biomes you had to kind of survive. And then you get an objective to capture or destroy something. It was very video gamey. Carl's kind of a tinkerer, and he ends up finding an item, quite literally, like the book title, the Gate of the Feral Gods, that can move things between locations. And he comes up with some ridiculous plan to manipulate the dungeon. It's kind of like quest, deity, god system. It's kind of confusing, but it basically ended up with, brace for impact, a sentient, it's a little confusing. They call things demigods and gods, what their power levels are, but there's a sentient kind of head that is now part of the team. They've got this floating decapitated head. And this was another book that keeps opening these narrative loops where I was starting to get kind of nervous if the author could finish them, because this is the first time the whole dungeon is run by some administrators. One of these administrators gets killed, and apparently that's kind of a big deal. Like, it doesn't usually happen. They're kind of sort of invincible, to say the least. And there aren't really any major consequences for it, but you can feel there's like a tone change here in the 4th, where books 1 through 4, everything has been absolutely wacky and absurd. And I don't think that ever goes away. But we went from like surviving to trying to win to thriving to, man, Carl might actually be able to do it. I think this was the first time he really, more than just pushed limits, he actually like did something that hasn't been done before in the universe, which is kind of crazy. And I just wasn't thrilled with kind of another narrative loop of like the fallout from killing one of the dungeon administrators was just not enough. I think it was a bunch of like legal discussion, but Carl was able to, have someone killed here that was running the big reality TV show. Like it was crazy. It was a crazy thing that happened. And I almost felt like it was underplayed. I know there's like time spent on it, but I kind of wanted to not pick up more wacky companions, but to maybe close some of these loops. And I actually have in my notes from this one, I was like, I don't know if I trust this author can finish the story they've started to read, because this book series is off the rails. Everything keeps getting more wacky, more absurd. We keep picking up more companions. We keep going through each dungeon floor is a crazy location. I'm having trouble keeping up with like all of Carl's and Donut's different abilities they picked up or artifacts or inventory items. And they keep just adding more baggage that Carl and Donut will need to get through to finish the series. Now, floor number 6 will come here in the book 5. So book 5 is the Butcher's Masquerade. And for floor number 6, I think it was called the Hunting Ground. So each dungeon floor has a theme, right? And in floor number 6, if you're one of the rich aliens, you can pay to enter the dungeon as a hunter. And you're kind of basically unkillable, and you can just kill whatever planet is getting harvested for the dungeon reality TV show thingy-majingy. You can collect treasures. Like the hunters all survive, right? But Carl decides that why should they survive? I got to start killing these people, right? And he gets an item. I think it was the Ring of Suffering or like Circlet of Divine Suffering. It had some wacky name. And basically, if he kills people, he gets a permanent stat increase. And this is again where we get reinforced that like the crawlers are kind of supposed to die. We're following Donut and Carl because they're the main characters, but they've gotten lucky or they've had someone more powerful protecting them at different points. We didn't necessarily know like the sponsor did a thing to like sabotage someone else or support someone else. Like there's a lot of moving parts so far outside their control that it's kind of frustrating to have your main character have so little agency. Like they're doing things that matter and changing the galaxy, but they don't get to see it. And we as a reader also don't really get to see it. So, there's all these rich aliens, you're essentially immortal, that show up to hunt, these crawlers in their little death game. And suddenly Carl is turning the tables and, killing them. And he's got an item that's permanently buffing his stats. This was kind of a dark book, not because it's really like that grim or gritty, but a lot of the tone is very light, even around like, hey, we just killed like 1,000 squid people in that squid village, or like 1,000 birdie boys over there in that last thing, or like we just ran a train over a bunch of goat men. Like there's clearly mass slaughter going on. But this is the first time it wasn't just like a quest objective or a level up. It was like, here's an item that's like, hey, you should probably kill some more things to take their levels. And this opens up like the wider political consequences of Carl's actions in the dungeon. Because if you're the rich alien that showed up for, every 10 years you get to go do this thing. You pay the money so you can't die. You can hunt the humans, whatever. And suddenly you get killed. Like there's real political consequences to this because it's no longer the NPCs getting killed. It's no longer some kind of construct. They're actually like wealthy citizens of, civilizations far reaching away. This is also the first book where I think a floor got skipped, if I'm remembering correctly. There's like a goat dude and he does something to force the dungeon to skip a floor, which is kind of crazy that was even a thing that could be done. I think here in book 5, The Butcher's Masquerade, this is the first book where the dungeon crawlers, right? The aliens show up, they repossess Earth, and they're like, hey, we have this reality TV show death game you can go be a part of. This is the first time that the crawlers here in their dungeon, they're no longer contestants fighting monsters, but they're more really armed insurgents fighting the audience, the establishment, and the powers that be. Like, there's an issue with there's like contracts or powers that control the dungeon. And so even though they're slaughtering real people from other planets now, there's not immediate consequences for some of their actions because the dungeon itself is a little bit sentient. And I don't think in book 5 that totally gets picked up, but I think there's some subtle clues that lead to that little foreshadowing. So we come into book 6. Book 6 is the Eye of the Bedlam Bride. And by book 6, we're in floor 8, which if you remember kind of messed up my earlier count where we are kind of doing like 2 dungeon floors a book. And so 18 floors, 9 books. Well, we're in book 6 on floor 8. So things are a little like weirdly paced and a bunch of narrative loops. Every book keeps getting opened. And in like almost every book now, my notes say afterwards, it's like, how does the author finish the story in a satisfying way? I do not know. Question mark. Because, last, like we have this cookbook that is passing down notes to figure out how to break the dungeon. We've got Carl killing real people that should be essentially unkillable. We have the administrators of the dungeon, kind of like the rules keepers or whatever, getting killed. Like things are way out of control. It's a lot of bodies hitting the floor, right? And so book 6, The Eye of the Bedlam Bride, we're in floor 8 of the dungeon. So hypothetically 10 more to go and you win, right? Wink. This was another floor where I liked the mechanics of the book, where you had these cards. It was like a literal card game type thing. But the book was really, I think, about emotional trauma. I think our main characters are starting to recognize that no matter what they do, things are just outside of their control. And they're kind of like getting angry and violent. And I think Carl gets another tattoo forced on him that does something to empower him. And some of the other main characters really start falling apart. They're dealing with some weird addiction problems. And the card mechanics are really brutal because I think you're like killing things and putting them in the cards. And if I'm remembering correctly, there's an issue here with some quest line or some storyline where two of the main characters, one of them has to die to keep going forward. Like things are getting so out of control in this book. It's like one of my favorite books in the series, but at the same time, one of my least favorite books. And it ends with this huge, big, massive cliffhanger. If I'm remembering this one correctly, we find out that there's a whole bunch of former crawlers. So people do survive this dungeon, and they're planning to come back to the dungeon to fight alongside Carl and the crawlers from Earth. And it's for the 9th floor faction event. So the book 6 here opens on the 8th floor, and it kind of like tells us halfway through that, hey, by the way, two main characters that you're supposed to like, Katya and Donut, one of them has to die in the next floor, and here it comes. And there's really like a big revenge story that starts to come out in this for Carl, where up to this point, Carl was like, you're not going to break me. I'm better than this. I'm better than you. I'm playing by your rules, but I'm going to change things. And it slowly like turns from, you won't break me, to like, I'm going to make you pay. Vengeance is mine. I'm here for revenge. You want to call it justice. I'm just here to like make you hurt. Carl gets this personal resistance. He starts to organize this revolution with people outside the dungeon. But again, this continues to open up a broader narrative loop of, okay, the aliens showed up, repossessed the planet. You've got Carl. You've got his cat named Donut. The cat becomes sentient. Now you have Donut, the sentient cat. You've got Carl. I think he eventually gets some pants, but I don't think he ever gets shoes. And eventually there's suddenly the leader of a resistance movement trying to take apart the systems that hold the galaxy together. It's crazy. The whole thing is crazy. And that brings us into book number 7, which is called The Inevitable Ruin, which is floor 9. This is another floor of the dungeon where wealthy alien leaders enter the dungeon and play this big war game. They have these protections that prevent them from dying, so they can't be killed, right? But the dungeon has stopped following the rules of the game. It's kind of complicated, but the short version is the dungeon is actually maybe a little bit more sentient than we at first thought. And so they changed the rules from, hey, you can come here and not die, to if you die here, it's for real. And like, that's a huge, crazy change. Because when we say like wealthy alien factions, I mean like heir to the throne, like royalty, like they're next in line to be king of 50 planets, like crazy people, right? Like this is going to change the political, the economic, the military landscape for trillions and trillions of people, planets across the galaxy, right? The scale has gotten so absurdly massive for a science fiction book that started with a sentient cat and a guy in his underwear, right? Like it's just out of control. There's this enormous war, this massive campaign, and there's a whole bunch of kind of long running character plots that just explode. Some people have some like get out of jail free cards they start using. I think this is when we finally learned that one of the crawlers from Earth is hiding 120,000 human children inside their body because they somehow were able to absorb them during Earth's destruction. I kind of forget. It got crazy. It got way too crazy. Like the numbers get crazy, the scale gets crazy, and the book keeps telling us that the geopolitical nature of the galaxy has been destabilized, but we never really get to see it, and the dungeon is breaking loose. Apparently the dungeons always kind of break down to some degree, but it's happened way too early, and the showrunners, the people that are supposed to kind of be in charge of the dungeon, these administrators, have lost the plot. They're not in charge anymore, and the dungeon is increasingly becoming more sentient and acting according to its own agenda rather than kind of the broader rules. And it turns out that we're actually watching a small scale war that I think is reflected in the wider galaxy. There's literally a war going on as this happens. We come into book 8. Book 8 is a raid of horribles. And floor 10 is this big race level. This is maybe my least favorite book in the series, book 8, where you race from start to finish. If you're not first, then you are eliminated or die. And, if you drove the car this round, then you can't drive it the next round. It's kind of like a fine premise, but this book has to work so hard to info dump and to like catch up a bunch of character narratives. It feels like the most filler of all the books, not because it's a bad book, but it's just as absurd as all the others, while at the same time trying to like cover some really serious stuff. So remember Earth got repossessed. Well, we find out that the reason the alien, civilizations collectively are destroying planets isn't just because it's valuable to mine resources, but there's hidden primal technology that the whole civilizations themselves depend on in some way. There's this big entity it needs to be fed. It's some kind of, I think it makes a really big effort to try and just tie up loose ends. It just didn't work for me. There's this whole thing with the primals or some ancient advanced civilization because science fiction, and the primal civilization transformed into some enormous collective biological intelligence. And then that massive primal intelligence technology slowly got split up and scattered. And next thing you know, it's being collected again. So we're harvesting planets. It's all like so far outside the realms of book one, where my main character was stepping on goblins to level up. He's got to beat up some goblins, get some XP, finish this quest. Like, we've left that so far behind, and we moved into crazy geopolitical events, future technology, past technology. Here comes time travel. It's out of control. I think, in summary, the whole dungeon crawling, the whole reality alien death show here, it's not anything to do with anything we've been told so far. It's really the industrialized harvesting operation for conscious life. Like, it's like so far off the rails yet again. And the whole television show for the crawl, the reality show for this death game, is just a monetized entertainment layer that's just built around mass slaughter. And because the broader alien galaxy is controlled, run by, operated by, built on the foundation of an ancient consciousness, like, things are falling apart on a mass level, because it's not just Carl leading a rebellion versus the powers that be that put him in this position, but it's literally the crawl, the dungeon, the death game here is run by what we thought was maybe a robot, like an AI system, some kind of artificial intelligence. But the artificial intelligence is actually a piece of ancient consciousness, and that's part of why it always goes out of control. There's just so many levels here to, if you listen to my video, it sounds like I'm kind of rambling. I'm not. I've got clear notes for this. This is the narrative. Now, could I have said this, in a shorter bulleted list? Yes. Aliens repossess Earth. A guy and his talking cat survive. They end up in alien death game, and it turns out to be a galactic revolution story about ancient artificial intelligence, an economy built on genocide, and our main character is trying to figure out how to break the machine. I said that at the start, and you might have doubted me a little bit, which is fair. Because even just looking at the book covers, like if you're seeing them in a store or something, you don't look at this and go, oh, there's a guy in a talking Vadd, a guy in a talking cat, right? You have talking Vadd, a guy in a talking cat surviving an alien death game. Okay, sure. Wait, are you telling me it's also going to be a story about galactic revolution, ancient artificial intelligences, economies built on genocide, and your main character systemically figuring out how to break every known system function in foundation of the universe? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it gets absolutely insane. And my notes from early on remain the same. I just don't know how this is going to end in a meeting. I just don't know that the author can successfully land the plane. I think they've started a lot of interesting things that I think I'll finish their conclusion. They'll end all their story loops. I just don't know if I'll be satisfied. And I don't even know if I want more books. I don't think more books solves the problems here. It's one of those things where, Donut as a character, I think starts out as more of a comic relief character, but eventually becomes an important political military leader. She's kind of a celebrity, and next thing you know, she's an emotional anchor, and then she's the leader of propaganda. It just gets like so crazy. She goes from, I'm just a little cat that talks on your reality show, to I'm now not just the entertainment, but I'm also the political, leader of an underground faction. It gets crazy. It gets crazy. Carl is kind of a passive dude. He's kind of, I don't mean laid back and chill. I think he's actually depressed. He comes across as kind of depressed, and not that he hates his life, but he's just kind of like whatever about things. He's just kind of passive. And each book in the dungeon, he just gets crazier in a terrifying way. Not that I'm afraid of him, but I'm like, man, like he's kind of a psycho. His superpower isn't really about his stats or all of his bombs. His superpower is kind of his refusal to accept assumptions. He keeps being told throughout the story, hey, here are the rules. And then he just breaks them. He abuses them. He blows them up, literally, figuratively, metaphorically. And then there's actually a third main character that kind of took a while for me to decide. And that's actually the AI, that artificial intelligence of the dungeon. It kind of starts out as this sadistic game master that's just throwing all these humans. Your planet's getting harvested. You're in the alien death game. And then you start to learn that the artificial intelligence controlling the dungeon's mechanics is kind of another prisoner who's literally insane. And as it keeps waking up, it doesn't become more sane or stable. It goes the opposite direction. So for me, when I kind of look back at my notes and kind of think back to how I think about these books, I feel like book 1 and 2, I'll call phase 1 of survival. And I'll sum it up like this. Earth is destroyed. Carl and Donut are victims. They're placed into this game where aliens expect them to kill one another for entertainment. That's it. And it's not a pretty pace. It's kind of fun to live the adventure through them, but man, I don't want to be there. And Carl has a really simple objective: just survive, keep Donut alive, keep himself alive. Phase 1 in my notes here for books 1 and 2 are just survival. And then I think of phase 2 as kind of an understanding of the systems, which is books 3 and 4. Carl gets that cookbook and realizes that he's not the only one trying to change things. They start to realize that the system has weaknesses, that the NPCs they've been killing might also be victims, and that the artificial intelligence running everything isn't really on the side of anyone but themselves. I think phase 2, books 3 and 4, I've labeled here in my notes as understanding the system. Carl really starts to learn how the machine works. Which brings us into phase 3 of the journey, which are books 5 and 6, which I've got labeled The Fight Back, where Carl is now deliberately killing people. He is killing hunters. He's killing administrators. He's killing sponsors, alien governments. Everyone's panicking. Everyone is panicking. And the crawlers in this horrible alien death game start to organize, and the artificial intelligence that runs the dungeon becomes increasingly insane and autonomous. I think for here, the big goals for Carl becomes make the participation in the dungeon too dangerous for the people who created it. Make them pay, fight back. And these aren't my most favorite books, and part of it is because they're just kind of heavy books. You know, they ask some really tough questions, and they don't give answers to any of them. And then kind of phase 4 is what I'm labeling right now as the Revolution, book 7. Maybe we'll get through books 9 and 10, and I'll be able to tidy everything up in the nice little 2-book phases. But phase 4 is Revolution, where it's a real war. There are actual, real individuals who are generals, who are deities, who are presidents, prime ministers, the real world leaders of their planets getting killed. And the former victims of the crawl are here fighting the galactic establishment as it fractures. And, you know, this phase 4, book 7, I think Carl's goal is destroy the institutions. I mean, he's out of control. He is a wild man killing everything. And by this point, 6 books in, you understand why. But it's just hard to like someone whose goal is to kill their people, even if they have a good reason for it. Like, yeah, they're kind of the bad guys. He's kind of the good guy. Yeah, but he's still killing people. He's still a murderer. You know, like it's kind of tough to relate to that for me. And then book 5, or book 8, sorry, for phase 5 here, I've got the real enemy. You know, Carl has discovered that this whole system is just one small problem in a larger set of just massive problems here, because it turns out that Earth is getting farmed, it's getting cultivated, harvested, and fed into a system, and the dungeon artificial intelligence is itself another product and victim of that system. You know, it's starting to look like it's Carl and Donut versus the surviving crawlers versus the NPCs that are starting to awaken, and the former crawlers and the rogue AI versus the entire civilization that built its prosperity on continuously harvesting conscious beings. Look, it's off the rails. It's crazy. It's zany. It's fun. I want to know where it ends. If I had to sum it all up kind of here at the end of 8 books, I just don't know where I am with it. I think I've enjoyed my time reading the journey, but I haven't necessarily loved the characters. I haven't necessarily loved what the characters have chosen to do. And I'm not sure that I could have done any better if I were in their shoes. I probably just got killed off early on doing something dumb because I would have relied a little bit too much on video game logic. But I'll tell you what, I understand why it's so popular. There's just a little bit of everything thrown in and the kitchen sink. And so I think it grabs a lot of people. I think it grabs a lot of people as a series because the premise early on in book 1 just is so easy to understand, simple, and just kind of makes sense. And it's only 8 books in that you're like, oh my goodness, this is like a crazy person's adventure. I think books 1 to 8, kind of where we're at here, is there's an alien civilization that has turned humanity's extinction into a reality show. Kind of the setup, right? And it accidentally gave one extremely angry man, that's Carl, and his cat, that's Donut, and the artificial intelligence running the show just enough power and information to start dismantling the civilization responsible. I'll say that one more time. Here at the end of book 8, just kind of looking back as a whole in a 1-sentence summary, we have an alien civilization that has turned humanity's extinction into a reality TV show. And it accidentally gave one extremely angry man, his cat, and the artificial intelligence running the show just enough power and information to dismantle their civilization. I do think the author has enough talent, skill, and dedication to finish the series. They said that there's a big final arc coming out in books 9 and 10, and then it'll be books 1 through 10 will be complete. And I think they'll be able to close the narrative loops. I just don't know if I'll be satisfied and happy at the end. And maybe I don't need to be. I'll read them either way. But what I definitely don't want to see is the book series get stretched into more books. I feel like 10's the right number for where we're at and what things are going on. Maybe there's a fun spin-off series that'll get written, but I'm really content with 10 books at this point, as every book has somehow gotten bigger and crazier. And I think when this series is over, I don't think it's going to be the end of Dungeon Crawler Carl. I think that universe is going to live on for a very long time. I think there's lots of fun side stuff that'll get made, but here, books 1 through 8, I'm definitely a little bit nervous for the ending, but I was kind of nervous for the ending around book 4. You know, I don't know I'm going to be satisfied. I don't think it's going to be a happy ending, and that's okay. But we'll see what happens because it's around the corner. They might be listening to this today and going, Vadd, there's not even a release date yet. But we can look at the author's productions, you know, how many books they've put out in a window of time. We can say, okay, is this their main project or not? How young are they? Do they care about this? And it really does seem like there's an author that wants to finish what they're writing, that enjoys what they're writing. They have some fun projects they have access to. I think it's going to come out a lot sooner than later. And we're at the point as well where there's people I know that do not read books on the regular that are approaching me and asking me about it that know that I'll read a book from time to time. So I know that it's gotten far enough into the cultural zeitgeist that it has left the lit RPG land and has started to become main cultural topic of discussion, which is kind of crazy because it's a pretty dark journey, especially by the end. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how popular can Dungeon Crawler Crawl get. I think that's a lot of fun because for me, I think that the story is going to have an ending. I think we'll get a conclusion. I think it'll be in 10 books. That's my prediction. I don't know if I'll be satisfied with it. I think we probably need to kill off some more characters, and we've kind of killed a lot of them. And we just don't know enough about the wider galaxy to really understand the full implications of what's been happening in the dungeon. And that's not the author's fault. We follow someone who's in the dungeon 99% of the time. I don't necessarily want to follow someone outside the dungeon, but I just don't understand all the fallout from what's going on. I understand there is a larger narrative going on, but we don't get to see that a lot. So I kind of hope we get a little more insight into that as well. To answer my original question, I asked you right at the start. I said, hey, when did you realize the series was becoming something much bigger than the original premise? And remember, the original premise was just right at the start of book one, guy and talking cat survive an alien death game, right? And for me, it really landed when we got to the book number 6, which was the Eye of the Bedlam Bride. Up to that point, it felt pretty self-contained, crazy, insane, wacky, zany. All these words absolutely apply. But it was really book 6 that I was like, oh, this is way beyond the original premise. Like, this is the one where things just finally clicked for me that it is absolutely not even a little bit where we started in the best possible way. I'm Vadd. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for spending time with me. I will see you in the next one.